What is the most statistically improbable thing that has happened to you? I always have a bunch of coincidences when I go to Japan. Sharing a layover flight with an old friend and stuff like that. One time I even saw an old high school friend in the small town I was in. Totally random, but his fiancée was from the area and he was meeting her family before the wedding. Craziest one was one time I went to Ueno Park and there were like 10 co-workers there at the same time. On Monday someone was like, "Hey, I waved at you last weekend, but I don't think you saw me ... No. But I waved at Bart. Bart didn't see me, but he saw a funny lunch conversation. If this is related applicable, but it's the first thing I thought of. My mother and grandmother were extras in a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Got to meet him and everything since in their scene they were up close to him. They said he was very nice. Several decades later I meet my now wife and her mother. Turns out, my mother-in-law briefly dated Arnold when they were both young. None of us have any connections to the film industry whatsoever. I'm just a regular person who's never met anyone super famous, so to me that's crazy. Was at the zoo on a school trip in 6th grade. We got onto the bus thing they have to transport people around the zoo, where there was already a large group of school kids. I sat in the row just in front of where the group was, only to turn around and see that their teacher was my teacher from 4th grade, who moved to another city over a day's drive away 2 years before. Just so happened that the school camp at his new school was in the area and both schools went to the zoo at the exact same time and got on the bus at the exact same time. Won $12,000 in a casino. A year later another $10,000. But the worst, lost my passport in the airport while waiting to board the plane. Long story short, they took my bags off the plane. Rebooked my flight at no extra charge 2 days later. Waiting to get my bags and found it in this tiny spot in my carry-on that shouldn't be able to fit anything at all. Jammed under a supporting frame for the bag and pull-out handle. It was a backpack. Don't know what the odds of that are, but it sucked. I laugh about it now though. I was living in NH at the time and visiting Vegas for a few days. There was a slot machine in Vegas, NGM Grand, that couldn't be removed until the top progressive was won. It was an old game, but it had a semi-cult following. I was planning on dropping $100 into it one afternoon while I was there. That after 20 years of the progressive never being hit, someone hit it that very morning for $2 per million, and the lucky winners were visiting from the tiny town I grew up in New Hampshire. I lost my driver's license on a work trip in a different state than where I was living. Moved from the address and apartment on my driver's license. 3 years later moved back to the same apartment complex, different apartment, and in the mail room. Throwing all my junk mail in the large trash can in said room. Saw the envelope on top in the trash can had my name on it but different address. Opened it and my lost driver's license from 3 years ago, nothing else in the envelope. Witnessed someone drop their phone whilst getting onto an elevator, and the phone fell perfectly through the crack between the elevator and the hallway floor. It was a pretty chunky phone with a case on. Can't have had more than 1 millimeter of clearance on either side, but I'll be darned if it didn't fall at the exact triangle. We all kinda just stood there in silent disbelief for the first 5 floors or so of the elevator ride. I ran into a semi that ran a stop sign, doing 50 kilometers per hour. No airbags, went off in a 2009 Explorer and walked away. The police officer that responded was quite shocked that I was walking around taking pics in high-vis clothing. He was expecting to be calling for the Jaws to get me out. Should have taken him up on the offer to be transported to hospital to be checked out. Ended up tearing my shoulder out the back of the socket. I have an autoimmune condition that affects 0.3 to 1 point for worldwide. My doctor thinks it may be part of an autoimmune condition, as a collection of symptoms. That one's prevalence is 0.04. Early history of autoimmune conditions: type 1 diabetes for my maternal grandmother, and colitis for my mum, which hasn't actually been diagnosed as autoimmune, but probably is, and being HLA-B27 positive. I was sitting on a park bench leaning backwards, stretching, and feeling the grass on the elevated land behind me. I randomly picked a plant. Person I was with, you got a 4-leaf clover. And I was like, oh, they must all be like that. I assumed it was some random plant cluster that all looked like 4-leaf clovers. and I was wrong. I totally blindly backwards grabbed a 4-leaf clover on a random park bench. After university, I went on a trip to Europe on my last night before flying home. I went down to the lobby of my hostel to get an alarm clock. At that exact moment, a friend of mine walked into the lobby. Neither of us had mentioned to each other that we were going to Europe that summer, but we ended up in the same city, staying at the same hostel, and entering the lobby in the same window of minutes. I made a girl see him multiple times. Here's the kicker, I did it in a completely different province. My roommate had a friend who apparently told her had a crush on me, and while I was away for a work trip, she had her over, showed her where my bed was, and told her to go nuts. This beautiful woman performed an Oscar award-winning performance on herself in my bed. Gentlemen, this is greatness. I'm from the movies, and saw on Twitter that Hideo Kojima was at the same showing in the same cinema, most likely in the same row as me. I splashed out on a fancy row, and looks like he did the same. The tweet in question, Kojima and status 1,066,842,100,572,942,766. S20. Not me, but I knew a woman whose husband died of a rare form of brain cancer in his 30s. She eventually moves on, meets a new guy, remarries, and he dies of another rare kind of brain cancer before he's 50. I can't even imagine how that might fuck someone up, losing two spouses to brain cancer like that, and so young. I was a police officer riding my motorcycle to work, and I was hit by a police car that had spun out of control whilst responding to a call. The police car was driven by a friend of mine. I was badly injured, and an ambulance arrived driven by a school friend, who I had not seen since school. Tell me the odds on that. Went on a vacation to a tiny resort in the middle of nowhere in Costa Rica. Met the other two couples staying there one evening. Or 6 total guests at this place. One was from France and the other not only from my same city, but the wife was on the board of directors for my tiny company. Absolutely crazy. My friend had 2 sets of monochorionic monoamniotic twins, the rarest kind of twins in back-to-back pregnancies. Identical twins that share the same amniotic sac and same placenta. Mono or momo twins happen in about 1 of identical twin pregnancies, and less than 0.1 of all pregnancies. I don't know if it's statistically improbable, but sure has me scratching my head. I've had 3 different people at 3 different drive-through restaurants who were in line in front of me, pay for my order. It certainly was a bright spot in my day. Just wondering if others have had that happen. I live in New York. Became friends with an Australian guy on the internet. Hung out with him. Met his ex at my friend's party a few months later. She was also Australian and just visiting. Also separately found out that the dad of my friend, who was hosting the party, knows my uncle. I was playing 9 square and some music was playing in the background. Someone hit the ball and it went out of bounds and, no joke, the ball hit the ground to the beat of the music for like 12 bounces. Needless to say, everyone lost their minds. Although I don't remember the song. I met people at Oregon Country Fair outside of Eugene, OR. That were my neighbors from down the street in a tiny town in Alaska. Their kid had an Alaska grown sweater on, and I commented that I lived there, and we figured out we lived on the same road and everything. Reached our roof. It somehow created a fireball that went through the roof and into the area you first walk in from, the front door. 2 minutes before I came through the door on the walk home from school. Driving down a back road in the middle of nowhere. Get a flat tire. Guy walks out of the bush with his dog. Helps me out. Asks for a ride back to town. Start talking. Turns out we know some of the same people. Turns out dude was a distant cousin. I was born with cerebral palsy in 1960, and I weighed a little over 200 pounds. I survived when the doctor said I wouldn't. Years later, my mother was laughing and I asked her why. She said the doctor that said I was going to die died. I was waiting for Lyft to assign me a driver for my ride. Since the wait was too long, I decided to try Uber instead. At the same time, I get a notification from both apps. Turns out that I was assigned the same driver on both apps. Bumped into Cindy Crawford while turning the corner on a NYC street. She spilled her coffee on me. I called her a bitch. Realized it was Cindy Crawford. Still thought she was a bitch for walking on the wrong side of the sidewalk. Was stationed with a guy in Japan who was originally from Sierra Leone. Transferred to another base in DC. Lived in a condo complex in northern VA. One of my neighbors was a cousin of the guy I was stationed with in Japan. Surviving, I scrolled through some working SD cards recently and out together a few random snippets from my existence, living as the purest art, playlist. List PL to OZNTAN Skeps Pexa for AF RJWF for YGXDH. I met two kids online at Busch Gardens, and we were talking for a bit over summer vacation. They later moved to my school district and we formed a DD group. I'm from a small town in upstate NY. Almost 500 miles away. I've played poker exactly one time in my life. Went to a buddy's house unannounced and he was hosting a poker tournament. I bought in for $40 just to participate. Came in second and win $150. Haven't played since. My dishwasher spontaneously burst into flames 3 days after its last cycle. Had the back window of my truck shot out randomly while driving on the highway. Contracted scurvy while living in a first world country. Won $50 from a scratch off. Cashed it out. And was literally mugged outside of the store. First time I ever bought a scratch off, first time I was ever mugged. Needless to say, I never bought another one.